chance to win. And good luck.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good evening to you. I'm Martin Daubney, covering for the big man, Nigel Farage, here on Farage. And it seems, in fact, that Nigel Farage is owed a huge apology because an investigation has found that the Southport riots were not caused by Nigel Farage. They weren't the Farage riots, as the Liberal media branded them. But, after all, in fact, they were largely whipped up by foreign agents. Don't you just love the taste of Liberal tears? And as Italy sends its first ship of illegal migrants to Albania, the UK government are reportedly reopening the asylum hotels that they vowed to close forever. Reports suggest that this will cost the taxpayer a whopping £4 million every single day, another Labour U-turn. And Sadiq Khan's Transport for London have banned junk food ads, and yet somehow billboards showing a controversial Islamic hate preacher and a Russian-linked fighter comply with its advertising standards. Welcome to Sadiq Khan's London. All that to come, but first, here's your news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good evening. It's just gone 7 o'clock. These are your headlines from the GB newsroom. The Israeli military says 50 trucks have entered Gaza with aid today after the US threatened to take away some military support unless Israel boosted aid within 30 days. It comes as fighting continues in Gaza, and Israel also hit Beirut for the first time in 5 days. Meanwhile, Hezbollah has fired more rockets into northern Israel, injuring at least 2 people. Meanwhile, here in the UK, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has said he's looking at sanctioning 2 Israeli cabinet members. Now, the government is scrambling to find more hotel spaces for migrants after a surge in small boat arrivals. Almost 14,000 have arrived under Labour, overtaking the number of crossings under the previous government in 2024. Meanwhile, Italy has begun sending asylum seekers to Albania under a controversial new plan, with a naval ship arriving on Monday, transferring 16 men from Bangladesh and Egypt. Italy says up to 36,000 asylum seekers could be sent to Albania each year, but only non-vulnerable men from safe countries will qualify. In other news, hundreds have gathered in Parliament Square today, calling on the government to protect the winter fuel payment for older people on low incomes. Led by charities, the campaigners are delivering a petition with over 500,000 signatures to the Treasury and Downing Street. They're demanding the payments extended to more pensioners after the government's decision in the summer to limit it to those on pension credit. Supporters say the cut leaves millions at risk during the colder months to come. Thomas Tuchel says he's very excited and honoured after being confirmed as England's new head coach. He officially starts in January with the goal of qualifying for the 2026 World Cup. The former Chelsea and Bayern Munich boss is the third non-Englishman to take the job, following Sven-Göran Eriksson and Fabio Capello. Tuchel has apologised for having a German passport, but insisted he was ready to prove wrong the critics who are against a foreign coach taking charge. And Prince William has defended his work trying to tackle homelessness, despite his own privileged royal life. In a new ITV documentary, the Prince of Wales is quizzed about critics who might question whether he is the right person to lead the project, which is designed to eradicate homelessness in 6 locations around the UK.
There will be some people who might question whether you're the right person to lead this project and its efforts to end homelessness. How would you respond to that?
I think everyone having a right to a safe and stable home benefits us all. I come with no other agenda than desperately trying to help people who are in need. And I see that as part of my role, is that why else would I be here if I'm not using this role properly to influence and help people where I can. And I like a big challenge. I do like that, but I can't do it on my own.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Martin.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophia. Welcome to Farage with me covering Martin Daubney. Now, in the immediate aftermath of the Southport riots, politicians, so-called anti-fascists and the mainstream media, they simply queued up to blame the British far right. And on top of that, list certain agitators, such of course as Nigel Farage. So desperate were they to prove this thesis that Sky News today even commissioned an investigation, a deep dive into mysterious Telegram groups. Tens of thousands of messages and thousands of chats and accounts were scrutinised. You can almost taste their disappointment that Nigel Farage didn't even make the list of agent provocateurs. In fact, get ready for this, only 6 of the top 20 most influential and inflammatory accounts were even from Britain. The far greater proportion were from overseas, including the United States, Russia, Germany and France. Or perhaps all of those who called them the so-called Farage riots owe Nigel Farage a massive, massive apology and should feast on a massive portion of humble pie. Well, joining me now in the studio is my panel, and it's the former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle and the former Tory MP Michael Brown. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Lloyd, I'm going to start with you. Every time there's an incident like this, the far right are to blame. When black players miss penalties, it's, the far right are the racists. But when we dive into it, it's often not the case. It's way too simplistic. The proof, the desire to highlight the fact Britain is seething with fascists, with racists, is so great, the truth is totally overlooked. And this investigation proves precisely that. Most people causing the most trouble online after the Southport riots, they weren't even British, and they certainly weren't Nigel Farage.
Well, I think you are taking one piece of truth and trying to extrapolate that too far. What the report says is that those who were creating the initial lies were these accounts from around the world. Well, we've known for a long time that accounts around the world, whether it be Russian accounts, whether it be Chinese accounts, Saudi accounts, etc. And this is what was interesting here is some of them are based in France and the US. That was interesting. They initiated a lot of the lies. But there is no doubt that Nigel Farage, his programme this is, he helped amplify some of those messages that were coming out of those groups. He didn't start them. He wasn't the initiator of them. And any people that claimed that he was the one orchestrating those riots, yes, they do owe him an apology if they claim that. But if they claimed that he amplified them, he amplified them in Parliament, he amplified them here.
No.
Then actually that's correct, and he should have some culpability for amplifying things that he should, as an elected politician, know better.
What you're doing, Lloyd, is precisely what I said at the start. The actual data, the analysis, the global network of hate, that's what this is about. It proves beyond any doubt, forget about opinion, forget about anecdote, forget about the aftermath, forget about the spin. The facts are the facts are the facts. Most of the accounts were from abroad. It was outside agents whipping this up. And that didn't stop people like James O'Brien on LBC. It didn't stop a great many people putting this on Nigel Farage. They were wrong then and they're wrong now.
No, in the groups in the Telegram groups or the WhatsApp groups or whatever the platform is that was spreading the initial stuff, it was clearly these agents provocateurs, some of them British, a large number of them probably right-wingers from Russia and France,
14 out of 20 accounts were overseas.
Yes, and we know that there is a network of right-wing interests that whip these stuff up, and we've seen how the far right in the US cooperates with the far right in Russia. That's nothing new, but it is very enlightening to have names and faces to some of these accounts. The difference was none of those things were on mainstream media, and this report doesn't look at how it was then reported in mainstream media. None of these things were being mentioned in Parliament until certain individuals decided to amplify them on the mainstream media and in Parliament. And those certain individuals bear some culpability. They don't bear the main culpability. The main culpability is the people that created these lies. They must be, and we must find a way to be able to hold them to account when they are in Britain or even when they are abroad.
But the point is this, and I promise I'll come to you in a moment, Michael. The point is this, the spin, the desire for this to be Nigel, the desire for this to be this mythical beast of the British far right, that becomes so delectable, so delicious, so tantalising. It becomes the truth before the actual truth comes out, and the spin that it's the British far right led by Nigel Farage is halfway around the world before the truth has even got its trousers on. And the truth is it was nothing to do with the British far right. It was 14 out of 20 accounts from foreign agents whipping it up, and yet nobody's interested in that. They want to pin it on Nigel.
Who makes the initial lie isn't the same as the person who then amplifies that initial lie. Both are culpable. The initial lie is worse, of course, and we need to find a way to hold people who make those kinds of lies, because you would, if it was normal press, you would be done for liable, etc. They need to be held to account. But just if you are an elected person, if you are a person of authority in this country as well, you have to be accountable to passing on information that you have not sourced properly, that you have not verified. And that is the problem of the online age. It's far too easy to read something online and then say, well, I've heard this, and you repeat the slur. That's what happened. And I don't think it's unfair to blame people for doing that, even though you can say that they didn't initiate it.
OK, right. Michael Brown, let's get you in. So you've heard what happened here, and I think Lloyd's response, if I dare say so, it is typical of the fact that the truth is inconvenient. The illusion that Nigel Farage is pulling the strings of everybody is far too tantalising, and therefore it becomes the truth.
Yeah. Look, I'm at a slight disadvantage. I'm of advancing years. I'm 74 years old next birthday, and I do not have accounts with X, with Twitter, with TokTok. I don't know what Facebook is or any of it. All I know is that they are very dangerous, especially where the foreign side is concerned. The only time I go to get my news, the only places I go to get my news are basically print newspapers and the news channels, this channel obviously, less and less the BBC, occasionally Sky News, as they seem to have got a bit of the woke culture driving their engines these days. But what I do know is this, that Nigel Farage is an honourable member of Parliament, and I don't associate him whatsoever with all of this. The responsibility for people being given dangerous information lies with these outrageous bots and foreign agents who are involved. And I do agree with Lloyd, he touched on it at the end of his comments, when he pointed out the dangers of the lack of ability to control what is fake news and what is real news. I do accept that that is a genuine problem. The idea that Nigel Farage was responsible for those rioters account to the courts for what they did. They shouldn't have done it, and I don't have any problems with the way the government brought to book, or rather the courts, the government, the police and the courts emphasised that they would be brought to book with the harshest of punishments. I do accept that, although I would like to see the same force of the law applied elsewhere in our process. But as far as I'm concerned, the idea that Nigel Farage fanned the flames and caused, and as a consequence of Nigel Farage's 4 million voters, of which I was one at the last election, were the people who were out rioting, I simply don't accept that.
And Lloyd, the point is that they were called the Farage riots. They became shorthand. They were almost solely pinned upon him by a great many media outlets. And if you recall what happened at the time, Nigel said, "Are the police giving us the full picture?" Now, in often case, we know they're not for lots of reasons. For example, how often do we hear a Skegness man committed a sex crime? It turns out, actually, it's not a Skegness man, it's an asylum seeker who happens to be in Skegness. We've seen the same thing in Germany.
That wasn't what happened in any of the riots. Come on, don't mention Skegness is irrelevant.
I'm making the point that the police routinely, and perhaps for good reason, withhold information on perpetrators because they think that's the most sensible thing to do. We saw it in Cologne with the sex attacks.
Because the law requires it. So in this case, the person was under 18. The law requires you not to release information. If you are an elected member of Parliament, you have to know what the law is, and to insinuate that the police were doing something underhand. Now, what they did do is they went and got a court judgment to be able to release the information. But everyone who is in authority should know that there is a process, and the police will always have to be more cautious in releasing data, because far worse to release too much and then prejudice any potential convictions.
But Nigel's point at the time was, when it came out from these foreign agents, from these agents provocateurs, from people outside of the UK trying to whip up a frenzy on British soil, when it came out, they were saying he's an asylum seeker, he's a Muslim, which wasn't true. If the police had said, yeah, that's not true, then Nigel's point was that may have put a lot of cold water on the coals and calmed things down. Sometimes more information is a good thing.
Yes, but then you pose the question differently. You pose the question, you say, I understand the police might have restrictions on being able to tell us the details of the person.
But they can choose what to release.
But, no, they can't choose what to release for under 18-year-olds. They had to go to court to get the ability to do that. And so then you say, I know the police of this, but I ask the police to expedite any court process so that we can get information to calm this down. That's not the phraseology that was used.
But that was what happened at the time.
Might have been what was meant, but that's not what was said.
Well, I certainly agree that the police do have a case to answer regarding how they ensured or failed to ensure the circumstances relating to the person that was ultimately arrested. Now, that particular individual, as I understand it, Lloyd, became 18, did he not?
Yeah.
During the course of the investigation after he was arrested. And there is a grey area there, but that doesn't excuse the responsibility of these outrageous... I just wish this wretched business had never been invented in the first place.
Yeah,
I got through a parliamentary career without knowing what social media was. The most we had was hand typewriters, electric typewriters.
That genie is out of the bottle.
But we can regulate it. We should be looking at how you regulate that. Now, I think it's not impossible to say, for example, if you want accredited status on any of these platforms, you have to have had your passport or ID registered. Not that everyone can see it, but that the companies will say, tick, you're a real human being. And if you're not, then maybe your access should be much more limited on these platforms. And I think that that's the kind of thing legislators need to start thinking about now.
That's a practical suggestion with which I would not disagree.
That will never work in the real world because, of course, Telegram, which is where this happened, sprang into the void created by the threats of identifying people, getting rid of anonymity on Facebook, on Twitter. There'll always be a new social media platform where this can happen. Gentlemen, we have to leave it there and move on at this point. Thank you very much to you both. Now, coming up next, the Labour Party promised to end asylum hotels, and that cost the British taxpayers £4 million every single day. But in yet another humiliating U-turn, GB News can reveal that Labour are now looking for more capacity. Have the lunatics taken over our asylum system?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're joined by Lewis Oakley and Esther Stanhope. And Lewis, let's start with Free Gear Keir, shall we? It's been the story of the week, and apparently it's led to, well, calamity in the polls.
Yeah, so he has dropped by 26 points in the opinion polls. And, I mean, it's just been sort of going down from day one. He didn't even start that high. But, yeah, this is just bad optics. As we say, like, he hasn't done anything illegal or wrong. Everything was declared, but at the same time, you're telling people they don't get their winter fuel allowance, and you're there walking off with your swag bag. It's just not a good look. And even, you know, I was thinking as well, the optics of them trying to clamp down on MPs having second jobs. You know, any of those could turn around and say, well, actually, we have to pay for our own clothes. I just think it's just bad optics that he's had. And, you know, we've got those comparisons of Sunak in the stands. He's just sat amongst the people. And
Prince William goes to Villa games, albeit in the director's box, but it's not an 8k per game seat. And by the way, can I just mention, this isn't just an isolated Labour incident. Since the start of their tenure, they were accused of filling the civil service with previous Labour donors, previous Labour aides, people who worked for Labour Together think tank. The civil service is meant to be politically neutral, and they bypassed a lot of procedures to get people into their positions, not least the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who parachuted Ian Caulfield, his name was, who donated £5,000 personally to her, and then he ended up in the Treasury with a 175k a year job. Yes, he did resign after it was revealed in the Times, but it does make you wonder, you know, you've spent years having a go at the Tories for this, and you do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's full of hypocrisy, and also the whole Sue Gray thing, and they were slagging off the Conservatives for not towing the line, and now they're being hypocrites because now they're taking freebies.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage. With me, Martin Daubney, covering for the big man. Now, a ship carrying the first group of migrants from Italy has docked in Albania, marking the start of a controversial plan to process thousands of asylum seekers in the Balkan nation. Now, while Italy is deporting migrants who've arrived illegally, the UK government, meanwhile, is actively looking for more hotels to put them up in, despite Sir Keir Starmer previously slamming the Tories' record. And joining me now to discuss both these topics is Kay Marsh, a migrant support coordinator based in Dover. Kay, welcome to the show. Can we start first on Keir Starmer? Once again, he's done a U-turn. He said he'd be getting rid of asylum hotels. They'll be ending under the Labour government. But today, here we go, looking to increase capacity. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, quite. I mean, it's surprising, not so much. Obviously, when we got the Labour government in this sector, we were very hopeful for some actual genuine change and solutions. It was a lot of empty promises, and now they're all being found to be empty promises. You know, he was giving the people what they wanted, but these were promises he could never actually deliver, and we're finding that out. So disappointing.
So a lot of GB News viewers will be disappointed with Sir Keir Starmer's U-turn for different reasons. What would a good solution look like to UK?
Well, we need to look at it in a completely different way, actually. And I think that we need to, especially with the backlog, you know, we've got people that have been here for a while and receiving support for a while. They don't want to be at the mercy of, you know, the British government. They want to be able to support themselves. So we need to start looking seriously at things like giving people the right to work who have been here for a little while. It takes the pressure off the government to supply people with, you know, money, food, accommodation, if you give people the right to support themselves.
But Kay Marsh, if you allowed asylum seekers, particularly those arriving via small boats, many of whom we don't even know who they are, let alone their criminal records, if they have any terrorist background, if you allowed them the right to work, you'd roll out the red carpet to the entire world.
You don't think that people should support themselves? You think it would be a better option that we keep supporting them? You don't think we should say, you know, you've been here a while, you want to work, we can't afford to support you anymore. here's a piece of paper that says you're allowed to go and support yourself. Surely that's a better solution.
I think a better solution would be to not allow people to arrive in small dinghies in the first place, or if we do, to do something productive with them. Can we then move on to the next point? Italy has done this deal with Albania. We saw today the first boatload of illegal migrants, people who entered Italy's shores illegally, as we have in our country at the Channel Coast there, down where you are in Dover. They're being shipped off to Albania to be processed. Seems like a fair option.
Well, we saw that with Rwanda, didn't we? And there was plenty of problems with that. I think, you know, if we're looking at moving people or, you know, building a facility, we need to be looking at building a processing centre on the continent, which will stop the small boats. I say this every time you bring me on, and I say this and I say this. We need an alternative. We need to stop the boats is what we need to do. It doesn't matter what side of the argument you sit on, we need to stop the boat. The only way we do that is by giving people an alternative route. If we build a processing centre on the continent and give people the right to start their asylum claim before they need to come to the UK, we can weed out people who don't have a legitimate claim to asylum, and we can take the people over quickly and safely who do, you know. And anyone caught trying to sneak in the back door, as it were, on a small boat will know doesn't have a legitimate claim, because otherwise they would take the processing route, wouldn't they? So, you know, it's a fairly simple solution that nobody is talking about.
Well, in that point, Kate Marsh, we're in absolute and total agreement. You know, you and I and GBNews viewers, no doubt, here don't want people to game the system. They don't want people to be able just to waltz into Britain, claim benefits, live in hotels, £4 million a day. So are you saying that we should follow the same route? We should have an Albanian-style system. You come to Britain illegally, you go straight to Albania, you process there. If you don't have a legitimate reason to be here, you get deported, right? You agree with us?
I said we should have a processing centre that allows people to begin their claim without needing to be on British soil, which is the situation we currently find ourselves in, which forces people across the water in small boats. We need to take away the need to reach Britain before we start an asylum claim. So we can do the pre-checks, we can do, you know, find out who people are, find out what their situation is, and if they have a claim. I do not think we should be shipping people off to Albania, no.
Why not? It would work. I mean, if people had a legitimate reason to be in the country, then they could be processed in Albania and be brought back. If they don't, we could deport them. It's a win-win.
It's not a win-win. It's a human rights violation. This is exactly the reason why Rwanda didn't go ahead, isn't it? You know, there's human rights violations in Albania. It is not necessarily a safe country. We've been through this with Rwanda. We have, like, you know, let's not do that again, because it's just wasting time, isn't it, on silly things that aren't actually going to help or come to fruition at all. We need to start looking at things that we can believe actually deliverable solutions, like a processing centre in northern France.
OK, I think we kind of half agree, Kay Marsh. Superb to have you on the show, as ever. Thank you very much. Migrant Support Coordinator there, based in Dover. Thank you, Kay. Now, let's get back to the studio and discuss it with my panel. Of course, I'm still joined by the former Labour MP, Lloyd Russell-Moyle, and the former Tory MP, Michael Brown. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Let's start with you, if we could, Michael. What's the problem with having an offshore processing centre like Albania? Shouldn't we have done that all along instead of wasting time with Rwanda?
Well, it's certainly the case that the Italian Prime Minister Meloni has now got the backing of the European Commission. This morning it's reported in the Times that Ursula von der Leyen has basically been forced to change the EU policy to the sort of policy that the Tories were incompetently grappling with. And Meloni is setting the tone, which is going to get the support of most of the European countries. By the way, the shots that were shown when Kay was speaking just now, I recognise that. That's Pimlico. That's where I live. That's about 400 yards from my home. It's Belgrave Road. And I remember that happening in 2023 last year. What it did was, it was only one particular hotel. And what it did was to ensure that people like my sister, who, because I live in a very small flat, come and stay in the hotels along that road, that it poisoned all the business for the other hotels around. And I represented a constituency in Parliament, a seaside resort, Cleethorpes, between 1983 and 1987, after my boundary change at the 83 election. And Cleethorpes, Skegness, I'm sure Lloyd would be aware of it, all along the south coast. Seaside towns are being ruined by the the dumping grounds. No, so like you, I half agree with Kay, but the blunt truth is Keir Starmer has not solved and is never going to solve the problem if he pursues the particular policy that he is at the moment. He, ironically, is now on the wrong side of the EU, so he looks completely stupid. I always said on day one of the new Labour government under Keir Starmer, I don't know why they just don't put a sign on the White Cliffs of Dover saying everybody is welcome. Now there's a Labour government. We've seen what's been happening since the 4th of July with the numbers of illegals coming in. I have a slight sympathy for Kay's point when she makes the point that if it is inevitable, and it is inevitable, that every single person who sets foot on this land between now and the next general election is not going anywhere under Keir Starmer's government, there is a case for saying, look, why don't we advance the opportunities for them to work legally? Because what we don't know is how much illegal workings and slavers are going on. I mean, I don't want them in. Or the alternative is to do what Maloney does, and that is to get boats to ensure that they don't set foot on their land in the first place.
Two very, very different solutions. Lloyd, isn't this another example of the Labour Party suddenly find themselves with their feet under the desk at number 10? Much, much harder in government than it is to throw words and accusations around in opposition. We will end asylum hotels, they said, even a few weeks into power. Now they're having to increase capacity because they simply haven't got Scooby-Doo. They can't stop the gangs, they can't smash the boats. Nothing is changing. In fact, it's getting worse.
Well, they shut, when Labour got in, a number of the hotels and the barges, for example, that were extremely expensive. And they have just put out last week a commission tender for two new for two sites to be run as reception centres. They're not yet up and running. So there is clearly a period of time...
£5 million quid a year. That's an ambition. It can't be controlled.
No, it's an admission that you can't do something overnight. So the aim is to get rid of hotels, but you have to build the infrastructure to get rid of them as well. So you reduce the number of hotels. We're going to have to temporarily increase them still below what the Tories were using, and then you've got the sites ready. Now, in terms of the Italian proposal, the Italians are taking all women, children and ill people. The people who go to Albania are people who never set foot in Italy, so they didn't arrive illegally in Italy, as you suggested. They're people who are...
No, they were attempting. They were in Italian waters on a boat. That's illegal entry.
They're not in Italian waters. They're picked up in international waters, and then the Italians take them to Albania. That's the clever legal trick, because they never were in Italian waters. And then in Albania, the big difference between Rwanda is, of course, Rwanda. Well, if you got your asylum claim approved, you then had to stay in Rwanda.
Yeah.
There, if you get your asylum claim then approved, of which there's a maximum turnaround time of 40 days, or our maximum turnaround time is years in many respects, then you can come to Italy. So I think that is actually a fairer system, and it is not far actually of what Kay was suggesting, that you have a processing centre in France, and if then you pick some people up in the Channel, you say, terribly sorry, we don't actually have a processing centre in Britain. Our processing centre's over in France. But don't worry, we'll sail you back safely there and we'll process you in the site there. Now, I think if Kay is suggesting that, and that's the kind of thing that you're suggesting, and the other
Turn the boats back to France. Lloyd, we agree on something.
Yes, but you have to have somewhere for them to go and to be processed. And then on the jobs front, I think the simple solution there is to say you can work, but half, two-thirds maybe of your wage will be kept aside. And if your application is successful, you'll get a nice lump sum that will help you set yourself up. And if it's not, that money will go to help spend the money on what's been done to look after you.
It's a utopian idea and it's never going to happen. Thank you very much, Michael and Lloyd. Let's move on, because Donald Trump is threatening to declare a bloody worldwide trade war by slapping both Brussels and Beijing with eye-watering tariffs of up to 2,000%. His goal? To make it so horrible for foreign companies to export to America, they move there right away. Is there method to Trump's madness?
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Still some pretty heavy rain around at the moment, but for many, tomorrow's going to be a fine day. We'll see some sunny spells, not as humid as today, but still pretty mild. Low pressures nearby. These weather fronts just dangling across the country have been producing pulses of heavy rain through the day. Still working northwards at the moment, especially wet over parts of northern England. Met Office yellow warning in place here, but staying pretty soggy over eastern Scotland. Rain moving across eastern England and out into the North Sea, and many western areas actually becoming dry overnight. It's not going to turn chilly though. Temperatures holding up in double digits. Many towns and cities staying in the teens. A drab start then early doors over eastern England, and a pretty wet start across parts of Scotland, particularly across the north. This rain slowly clearing away though through the morning. Actually, for rush hour through the central belt, it may well be drying up. Certainly elsewhere, many places having a dry morning rush hour. A lot of cloud initially over these eastern areas, but clearing away, and elsewhere we'll see some clearer skies coming through. Just maybe one or two scattered showers for Wales and southwest England, and as we get through the day we'll see a few more of those here and perhaps for Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. The rain over northern Scotland, that continues to move away, and for many it's a dry and a bright day tomorrow. Some pleasant autumn sunshine. Turning a bit breezy in the west as a few more showers come in through the afternoon, but most relatively light winds and still pretty warm. Not as humid as today, but these temperatures still well above the average for the time of year, mid to high teens. Friday will start a little cooler with some mist and fog maybe in places, but generally another dry day across the east. Increasingly cloudy further west with some wet and very windy weather in the northwest, and with high tides that could cause some problems. So there's a Met Office yellow warning in place for that, and the potential for more wet and windy weather into the weekend. So do keep up to date with the forecasts. Bye for now.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets at My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Dawdley, standing in for the big man. Now, Donald Trump could impose a, wait for it, 2,000% tariff on the European Union as he threatens a trade war after warning that the bloc poses an economic threat to the United States. The former president, who is eyeing up 4 more years in the White House, has made the economy a key pillar of his election, including the imposition of tariffs on imports in a bid to protect US industry and manufacturers. And in a recent interview, he took aim at Brussels, saying, you know what's very tough? The European Union. Our beautiful European countries, they treat us so badly. Well, joining me now to discuss this is a Democratic communication strategist and the author, Spencer Critchley, who once was an advisor to Barack Obama. Spencer, welcome to the show. Is there any method in Donald Trump's madness? He's clearly pointing out that he's trying to protect the American motor industry by saying there'll be massive tariffs, for example, on electric vehicles manufactured in Mexico. In China, he's clearly trying to put American jobs, the working classes first, but 2,000% tariffs? What's your take?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for that introduction, but I do want to say I did not advise Barack Obama personally. I was one of many advisors on his campaigns. In terms of method to Trump's madness, I would say you might say the madness is the method. Many people assume that when Trump comes out with these radical ideas which are fundamentally, as conservatives know, anti-conservative, they assume he must know what he's doing because they think he's a business genius. But what they don't realize is that's an image from a TV show, the enormously popular Apprentice TV show, which was entirely fabricated. And that show was created after Trump had already established himself as a serial failure. He was essentially broke and a joke in the New York business world, but The Apprentice recast him as a business genius, and he actually did start to make some money from that TV show. So these ideas are ridiculous to anybody who understands basic economics, and have been known to be ridiculous, well, patriotically enough, since the year 1776, which happens to be not only the dawn of the American Revolution, but when Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations and pointed out that this kind of mercantilist economic policy not only doesn't do anything useful in terms of competing with other countries, but it actually inflicts harm on your own country.
Yeah, and yet, though, Spencer, the chief executive of BMW in Germany today was basically saying the same thing as Donald Trump, but not so much of a mallet to the skull. He was saying that the Chinese market is flooding the EU with dirt cheap Chinese vehicles. Of course, there are billions of dollars of state subsidies to make them so cheap, so they're economically uncompetitive. Europe can't compete with Chinese vehicles. America can't compete with Chinese vehicles. When China sets up in Mexico and pumps them over the border into America, then America can't compete with that either. So at the heart of this, you have to confess, the chief of BMW agrees there has to be economic protectionism, otherwise the American auto industry will be decimated.
I think there's a very important distinction here. If a country like China is using the state to subsidize an industry and artificially depress its prices, then yes, there is an argument to impose tariffs on that country in order to compensate for that abusive practice. That's a very different thing from what Trump is talking about. He's spinning this fantasy, and spinning fantasies is essentially his stock in trade, that we should put tariffs on everything and force all manufacturing somehow to move to the United States, and presumably all mining, all production of lumber and other raw materials, including raw materials that don't exist in the United States. All of that needs to move to the United States, and that will somehow magically work. And it would have to magically work immediately on him taking office, by the way, in order to avoid the massive economic crisis it would no doubt generate.
OK, Spencer Critchley, we'll leave it there. Thank you very, very much for joining us on Farage on GB News. And joining me back in the studio, still with my panel, the former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle and the former Tory MP Michael Brown. Gents, welcome back. Lloyd, start with you. You raised a fascinating point in the break about how you think this actually might play well with Democrat voters in the Rust Belt. Tell us more.
Well, you heard there Spencer saying, oh, well, no, classical economics says that this is rubbish. I'm afraid, one, it's an amnesia of actually how America and how Europe developed, because Europe and America developed through protectionism first, and once the industry is then ready to compete, just like you do with a child, you don't suddenly shove a child out into the wilderness, you nurture them, you raise them, you protect them, and then when they are strong, ready to go out into the wide world, you then release them. That's how all countries in the developed world have developed, and it is a lie that then the developed world has told the poorer world, oh, well, actually, you should have no protectionism, dears. And actually, a lot of working class people are totally fed up with this lie that suddenly that they're trying to rewrite history, trying to say to them, no, protectionism never helped you. They know it's not true. They know the reason that the American auto industry became great is because America protected themselves. They bought American. And so when they hear Donald Trump saying things that they know from their lived lives worked, they know actually made them better and wealthier, they like it. Now, 2,000% is complete madness, but some level of protectionism. And what also a lot of them know is that you have high labour standards, high environmental standards. If you then don't put in forms of protectionism, it isn't about actually saving the environment. All it is about disappearing jobs from Britain and America and giving them to China. And I'm afraid we need to get smart. If we want high environmental protections and high workers' protections, which I do, we then need to say to China, to Russia, to all the rest of the world, if you want to import into us, you have to either have the same standards or we're going to charge you. because it's totally unfair and it destroys jobs.
Lloyd, a spirited defence for nationalism, protectionism, and dare I say it, populism.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Not absolute populism and not absolute protectionism. At the right moment,
I can't believe what's happening here. I represented a steel constituency in the first 4 years of my time in Parliament, and I was arguing to my own government, look, the European Union is dumping their steel and threatening the steelworks in Scunthorpe and the steelworks in South Wales and elsewhere. We're just about to lose our steel industry, and that is because of China. When we lose our steel industry because we can't supply our car industry with anything except expensive steel, it'll all be coming in to make the cars. We will lose our car industry, our steel industry. Every one of the wind turbines that are being erected on land and at sea come from China.
Great stuff. Thank you, gentlemen. A spirited debate, Michael Lloyd. Excellent stuff. Thank you. Now, coming up next, inflation has unexpectedly dropped. I wonder if Mr Sunak is kicking himself for calling an early election. I'll be discussing this next, Mr Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Conservative MPs have finally chosen their top two for the leadership. And now, it's over to the members. Join me, Christopher Hope, tomorrow as Kevin Badenoch and Robert Jenrick are quizzed by Conservative Party members and myself at our GB News leadership event.
And afterwards, join me, Patrick Christys, with a live studio audience and a star panel as we discuss what it means for the Conservative Party and what it means for you. Decision time, the race to lead, from 7 p.m. tomorrow, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
A furious online debate has been sparked after, well, let's just say a rather large man, I mean, he really was big, was snapped trying to fit into his seat on the plane.
It's led to some to ask whether obese passengers should have to pay for extra plane seats so they don't inconvenience others.
Some say, though, that's cruel. So should plus-size passengers pay extra for plane seats? Let's talk to former presenter of Fat Families, Steve Miller, who's in Stratford-upon-Avon, and the director of All About Obesity, Sarah LeBrock, who's in beautiful Harrogate. Good to see you both this morning. Sarah, what do you think?
Well, we've had this debate before with Steve and I, to be fair, and I think it's one of those things where planes are just not fit for purpose anymore. So people's bodies have been growing over the years. We know this, the obesity rates are increasing, etc. But what's happening to planes is the seats are decreasing in size. So they're just not fit for purpose and not fit for the population. So I think it's just one of these things where we need to be more empathetic to people, that they're trying to fit into an environment that isn't shaped for them at all. So I think we do need to kind of say, well, what's right here? Is it the person not being able to fit in the seat, or is it the seat not being fit for purpose for the person? And I think we need to really, look at things from that perspective as well. Instead of thinking the person's doing something wrong, how about the environment might be doing something wrong?
Steve?
It's not about blaming, but the message you can't put out, in my opinion, is that it's okay to be obese and don't worry about it. You see, what I'm saying here is free plane seats. If you're offering free plane seats, an extra seat, that's going to normalise obesity.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Conservative MPs have finally chosen their top two for the leadership. And now, it's over to the members. Join me, Christopher Hope, tomorrow as Kevin Badenoch and Robert Jenrick are quizzed by Conservative Party members and myself at our GB News leadership event.
And afterwards, join me, Patrick Christys, with a live studio audience and a star panel as we discuss what it means for the Conservative Party and what it means for you. Decision time, the race to lead, from 7 p.m. tomorrow, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney, standing in for the big man. Now, last week, GB News exposed how adverts featuring a controversial Muslim hate preacher and a Putin-linked UFC fighter were being displayed on public transport. London Mayor Sadiq Khan made assurances that he would look into the offending adverts, but of course TfL have told GB News that the ads had been reviewed and were found to comply with its advertising policy and continue to appear across London. Now, this is the same TfL who banned an advert about a piece of cake this time last year. Gonna make it up. Now, in an unexpected turn of events, perhaps, UK inflation has dropped to 1.7%, marking a significant decrease that has caught economists by surprise. Former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's decision to call a general election early now seems very, very premature. Surely, had he waited, he might have capitalised on a more stable economic environment. And joining me now to discuss this, as well as my panel, is Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, and my panel, the former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle and the former Tory MP Michael Brown. Sir Jacob, I have to start with you. This morning, when I saw this, the first thing I thought was, wow, Rishi Sunak's hit his inflation target. He's got below the 2% Bank of England and on schedule. One problem, he's not the Prime Minister. Why on earth, with this in mind and immigration, while still high, nevertheless, is down? Two key metrics hit. Surely this points out it was a terrible mistake to go for an early July election.
I'm amused that both you and Keir Starmer seem to think that Rishi Sunak's still the Prime Minister, because I think he called him Prime Minister once or twice during PMQs today. And I think that's right. I think the early election is inexplicable, that so many good things were about to come through. Inflation was coming down. Interest rates will be coming down. I mean, the Bank of England's been useless, as always. It should have cut interest rates already, but they will now come down further. You're quite right about immigration. If the Conservatives had been in office, we would have begun to get flights off to Rwanda. Everything was moving in the right direction, and he cut and run. And I don't understand it. I couldn't see at the time why he did it. Once you're in an election as your candidate, you have to support what's been done. It's no good opposing it then. But looking back, it was a very odd decision.
Why do you think he did? I mean, you've obviously been the rumour mill. I mean, I hear all the time he's just simply had enough. He'd had enough of being Prime Minister. He had enough of his wife's finances being investigated. He was through with it all. And to hell with the country, he just called it early. Is there any merit in that?
No, I don't think that. I think almost nobody ever has enough of being Prime Minister. In our whole history, almost everybody wants to remain in office longer.
David Cameron did. He cleared off the day after losing Brexit.
But that's because he'd lost Brexit and he knew he was going to be forced out. He didn't want to give up being Prime Minister. He felt he was born to be Prime Minister. Boris certainly didn't want to give up. Theresa May cried when she gave up being Prime Minister. So did Margaret Thatcher, actually. So I very much doubt he wanted to give up. And I think Rishi Sunak is a very decent, honourable, patriotic man. I don't think he's that sort of lightweight who would go off vamoose because of foolish reasons. He must have thought there was a risk things could get even worse. And of course, if he'd waited till November, one N. Farage, Esquire, now MP, might have been off in America supporting Donald Trump, which would have made it a lot harder for Reform to get the momentum it got in July.
So it was all done to stymie the efforts of Reform. But Lloyd, nevertheless, a gift to an under-fire Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. She can now say, look, inflation's down, nothing to do with Labour, but she'll claim the credit for it.
Well, all parties claim the credit, don't they? You know, kind of, and they blame the other side for all the bad stuff. That's how politics works. But I think that they will... I think that there has been a worry of turmoil in the country, and the Labour government coming in has settled a number of those worries. You now know where the long-term direction of the country is going. And it's not about Labour getting in, but it's about when you know the elections, is it going to be this month? Is it going to be the month after? It makes it very difficult to make long-term plans for the country, makes it difficult to do investment, and it makes it difficult to get some of that economic stability that is essential for reducing inflation and other things. So I do think that the fact that it's post-election is not coincidence that you've then had inflation down. Is it directly because of policies of Labour? Well, economists will have to tell us, but I suspect it's more about the stability of a post-election government you've got for 5 years.
Michael Brown, is this the final proof, if anyone needed it, was a disaster to call an election early?
Oh, utterly. And what I think was criminal was the fact that, according to the newspaper reports, he had already informed the King without having a cabinet meeting beforehand. It seems to be that there are a large number of cabinet ministers who would have argued the toss in cabinet as to whether he should do that, for the very reason that we now see that inflation has come down. It wouldn't have saved the day. I think Keir Starmer would have still had a good, decent working majority, but he gratuitously threw away a number of members of Parliament like Jacob who might otherwise have held on.
OK, thank you very much, gentlemen. Michael Brown, Lloyd Russell Moore, thanks for joining me. Now, just to remind you, tomorrow night we bring you on GB News Decision Time, the race to lead. Of course, that's between Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch, and you can get involved, and here's how. You can send in your questions to gbviews@gbnews.com with Decision Time in the headline of the email and the subject field. And please don't forget to include your full name and where you are from. And Chris Hope may well read out one of your questions to the leadership hopefuls. Now, quickly to Jacob. Coming up next, of course, is State of the Nation. What's on your menu?
Well, we'll be talking a bit about inflation, but also more about Taylor Swift-gate and why the Prime Minister is behaving like a lovesick teenager over this pop star and giving her this extraordinary police escort treatment. It's all very peculiar and doesn't seem to meet the ministerial code.
Don't you think, though, that actually an international megastar that brings £3 billion worth of investment to London deserves a decent escort?
No, definitely not. The only people who deserve escorts are doing something for the country, that is to say, the King, the Prime Minister, in urgent government business, because every time some rich person goes ahead, somebody else is held up. And in a democracy, you should not be holding up the British people.
Superb stuff, and that's coming next with Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation. Thanks to my panel. But first, here's your weather with Alex Deakin.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Still some pretty heavy rain around at the moment, but for many, tomorrow's going to be a fine day. We'll see some sunny spells, not as humid as today, but still pretty mild. Low pressures nearby. These weather fronts just dangling across the country have been producing pulses of heavy rain through the day. Still working northwards at the moment, especially wet over parts of northern England. Met Office yellow warning in place here, but staying pretty soggy over eastern Scotland. Rain moving across eastern England and out into the North Sea, and many western areas actually becoming dry overnight. It's not going to turn chilly, though. Temperatures holding up in double digits. Many towns and cities staying in the teens. A drab start then early doors over eastern England, and a pretty wet start across parts of Scotland, particularly across the north. This rain slowly clearing away, though, through the morning. Actually, for rush hour through the central belt, it may well be drying up. Certainly elsewhere, many places having a dry morning rush hour. A lot of cloud initially over these eastern areas, but clearing away, and elsewhere we'll see some clearer skies coming through. Just maybe one or two scattered showers for Wales and southwest England, and as we get through the day we'll see a few more of those here and perhaps for Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. The rain over northern Scotland, that continues to move away, and for many it's a dry and a bright day tomorrow. Some pleasant autumn sunshine. Turning a bit breezy in the west as a few more showers come in through the afternoon, but most relatively light winds and still pretty warm. Not as humid as today, but these temperatures still well above the average for the time of year, mid to high teens. Friday will start a little cooler with some mist and fog maybe in places, but generally another dry day across the east. Increasingly cloudy further west with some wet and very windy weather in the northwest, and with high tides that could cause some problems. So there's a Met Office yellow warning in place for that, and the potential for more wet and windy weather into the weekend. So do keep up to date with the forecast. Bye for now.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.